What is it about the GameCube? Whether it was Wind Waker's unique art style or Metroid finally making the leap into 3D, this era just seemed like a time when Nintendo was unafraid to experiment with even its biggest names. In the majority of cases, this went down like a treat, but for Star Fox, things weren't so cut and dry. After Star Fox 64 revolutionized the franchise, fans were anticipating something big. With the improved technology of the GameCube, everyone was expecting an adrenaline-pumping, fast-paced, on-rails shooter with improved graphics to boot. What they got, however, was not the game that they were hoping for. What they got was Star Fox Adventures. This left fans feeling pretty confused because it felt more like a Zelda game than anything. The future was not looking good at this point, but Fox still had one more GameCube title ahead of him. Enter Bandai Namco, who were tasked with taking the helm of the next Star Fox game in the hopes of breathing new life into the franchise. What they created was a game that didn't just reuse the same ideas from past entries, but instead expanded upon them, taking the franchise in a new direction that felt like a natural progression from before. I'm FibreOpticBroadbean, and this is the untold potential of Star Fox Assault. Star Fox Assault's gameplay can be broadly divided into two main halves. You've got the on-rails flight missions, which strongly resemble the gameplay of prior games, and then you have the on-foot ground missions, probably the most divisive part of this game. The flight missions are fantastic, and they capture the same feeling as the Star Fox 64 ones. It's the same fast-paced action we all know and love, with asteroids to blast through and enemies everywhere to take out. You can still use all the same techniques like somersaults, barrel rolls and smart bombs, and it's still just as satisfying to upgrade your lasers to the max and tear through enemy defenses. Of course, it wouldn't be Star Fox without the little interjections and bits of banter from the crew members sprinkled in for good measure. I'll admit, the one-liners here aren't as iconic as they used to be, because let's face it, it's hard to beat "Hey Einstein, I'm on your side," and the "hatches are open" or other such lines, and you know, the delivery can be a bit awkward at times, but they still nail the team dynamic here. Plus, the janky voice acting often makes for some unintentionally hilarious cutscenes.
Huh? Who's this idiot? Quiet bird. What was that?
Like, you just... The timing is just so off, and it's brilliant. The visuals, of course, have seen a huge overhaul since Star Fox 64 and still hold up to this day. Some of the environments you fly through are gorgeous, and that's to say nothing of the R-Wings themselves, which have seen a few design updates. They look a lot more advanced in this game, I like it. I also have to mention the music that accompanies these missions, which is amazing. The orchestral soundtrack really packs a punch, and I love the new rendition of Star Wolf's theme. But as you guys know, those aren't the only missions in Star Fox Assault. For a lot of this game, you'll actually be outside of the R-Wing and traversing enemy territory on foot. Many people weren't a huge fan of this change as, once again, this was a bit of a shift in gears for the franchise. It's understandable why fans felt this way. The on-foot missions are significantly slower paced than the R-Wing ones, and the controls do feel a bit primitive. However, once you're able to make the adjustment and get used to these segments, they're actually a lot of fun. One of my favourite parts is the wide variety of weapons you have access to. Of course, you start off with the standard blaster, which has infinite ammo and is pretty versatile, but there are a ton of others you can pick up along the way. You've got the machine gun for taking out swarms of enemies, the homing launcher which has a low fire rate but can take out much stronger bad guys, the sniper rifle which is exactly what it says on the tin, and then there's the Gatling gun. This one's pretty hard to come by, but for good reason. When you pick it up, it is the best thing ever. Alongside these, there are also a few other weapons you need to use a little bit more strategically, like the grenades, which you can chuck around corners to take out unsuspecting enemies. The sheer range of options the game presents you with is wild, but my only gripe is that cycling through them can be a bit of a pain, especially in fast-paced combat situations. Perhaps it would have benefited from having some kind of weapon wheel, Twilight Princess style, but hey, that's just a small gripe anyway. In the majority of these missions, you'll also have access to the Landmaster, which feels better than ever to control. It feels great to smash through enemies with this thing, and the laser is crazy strong too. It does, however, have its limitations to prevent it from being too overpowered. Given its size, you can't take the Landmaster into buildings or enclosed spaces, so it's best suited for combat in more open areas or covering larger distances. This is not a problem, however, as the transition between on-foot and Landmaster gameplay is completely seamless. One slight drawback is that these missions can feel a little bit repetitive, as the objective is usually just to run around destroying X amount of a certain enemy, spawner, or whatever the game asks of you. Honestly, that is just a bit of a nitpick though, as I found myself having a good time with them for the most part. I think the missions in which Star Fox Assault truly excels, however, are the ones in which you change between on-foot and aerial combat on the fly. In one instance, you have to go into an enemy base to take them out from the inside, but at the same time, you have to keep an eye on the gauge at the side of the screen, which indicates how many enemies there are in the sky. If this gets too high, you'll need to quickly hop into your R-Wing and take out a few guys to lower the gauge a bit and keep the enemies in check. These aerial combat segments take a similar approach to the all-range dogfight segments of Star Fox 64, like Katina and Fortuna, in which you fly around a more open area rather than being on rails. Personally, I love how seamless it is to hop in and out of the R-Wing, and it adds an element of multitasking that simply didn't exist before in the Star Fox franchise. Another mission of a similar style that I loved was the one where you go back to Dinosaur Planet from Star Fox Adventures. As someone who genuinely enjoyed adventures, yeah, I know. Revisiting ThornTail Hollow was awesome, and seeing it completely overrun with aperoids was a stark contrast to how peaceful it used to be. This mission in particular had some nice attention to detail. I just thought it was so cool how they included the room where you get your staff upgraded in Star Fox Adventures and filled it with weapons in this game. There's even the cutscene at the end where you get to see Tricky the Triceratops all grown up. This whole mission is almost like a love letter to Star Fox Adventures fans, and I am totally on board with it. Now, in a series like Star Fox, which is now infamous for rebooting and reusing the same tired old plotline, I really wasn't expecting much going into Assault's story. I just thought it was going to be the same old Andros has taken over the Lilat system deal, but I was so glad to be proven wrong. The game is set a year after Star Fox Adventures, with Andros having been defeated once and for all, this time for real. This means that there's a new villain in town, and this takes the form of the aperoids, a parasitic insect species capable of taking control of living creatures and machines alike. We'll get into more detail about them later on in this video, but just having a foe that's different from Andros is such a breath of fresh air. Perhaps the best part of this story for me though is just how much we get to see these characters grow and become fleshed out. While they aren't super deep or anything like that, they're no longer just the one-note wingmates they used to be. This makes the story feel a lot more compelling and easy to get invested in, which can in part be attributed to the linear approach that the game takes. You see, Star Fox Assault does away with the branching paths featured in previous games in favour of one single narrative. This provides ample time for characters to develop and overall just feels a lot more cohesive. It's hard to take it seriously at times because of the dodgy voice acting, but there are still some genuinely good ideas here. For starters, the team has seen a bit of a restructure. Falco and Slippy are still along for the ride, but Peppy is retired from his role as a pilot, instead serving as the team strategist. In his place is Crystal from Star Fox Adventures, and this is already a good change. Rather than being a near non-entity like in Star Fox Adventures, Crystal has a much more prominent role here, and Peppy taking a backseat to give the team advice means that we kinda get to see his fatherly characteristics a bit more. Slippy is still just as useless as ever. Okay, I kid. While he's still a pretty incompetent pilot, it's made clearer than ever in this game that he knows his stuff. Then there's Falco, who's still the same cocky, snarky guy we all know and love, but we also see in this game that he genuinely cares for the team and is loyal to a fault. Falco's always been dubbed as the team's ace pilot, but it's only in this game that we really get to see that, with him often being put in charge of the skies while Fox takes out enemies on the ground. It's also neat to see more of his friendly rivalry with Fox, and the banter between them is still on point. Speaking of Fox, he also feels like a much more developed character than before. As the leader of the team, we get to see him taking charge, always acting in the name of justice. In Star Fox Assault, he has to make a lot of really difficult decisions actually, and by doing this, he shows his calm and collected nature, often having to put his emotions aside. Fox is often forced into these situations by the Aparoids, who are built up as this almost insurmountable force. It all starts when the team manages to take out a giant Aparoid they're faced with, which leaves behind a core memory. Just as Fox is about to grab it, Pigma, who's been kicked out of Starwolf, swoops in and grabs it for himself in the hopes that it will make him rich. This backfires heavily as we see Pigma slowly being taken over by the Aparoids, his mind under their control. Eventually, this all culminates in a massive boss fight against a completely infected and disfigured Pigma, and I mean, this speaks for itself. For a Star Fox game, this is super dark and genuinely a little bit creepy, but again, I'm all for it. As a side note, I just think that Pigma's overall story is really interesting. He started off as a member of the legendary Star Fox team, fighting alongside the likes of Peppy Hare and Fox's father, James McCloud. At this point, Pigma was well respected and considered a hero, and things could have very easily stayed this way. However, as we know, they most certainly didn't, after Pigma betrayed his team, selling them out to Andros, which resulted in the death of Fox's father. He then joined Starwolf, a rival team to Star Fox, and continued to fight alongside Andros, but even then, even on the villain side, he was kicked out for being too greedy. His greed continued to just grow and grow, consuming him and resulting in his eventual downfall, one that he completely brought upon himself. Pigma is a prime example of an unlikable yet compelling character, and they did a great job of tying up his story and assaults. Sorry, I know I just went on a complete tangent about Pigma of all characters, so let's just get back on track. The whole Pigma situation clearly shows us what the Aparoids are capable of, but the stakes only get higher from here. As Fox is attempting to defend Corneria from an Aparoid invasion, he quickly becomes surrounded and completely outnumbered. But then, out of nowhere, Starwolf saves the day. He then proceeds to hop aboard his wing, gunning down enemies, and this is just such an awesome moment. We always see Fox and Wolf at odds, so it's so cool to see them set aside their differences and work together to take down a greater evil. But then the unthinkable happens. As Fox is taking out the last few enemies, in flies General Pepper, who's been infected by the Aparoids. We saw this happen before with Pigma, but it hits so much harder when it happens to someone on your side. Remember when I said that Fox would have to make some pretty difficult decisions in this game? Well, this is one of them. He doesn't want to shoot down the General, that's his friend, his ally, but if he doesn't do it, who knows what will happen. Pepper, with the last of his consciousness, urges Fox to shoot him and let him die with his honor. Again, pretty dark for a Star Fox game, right? With the encouragement of Wolf and the rest of the team, Fox eventually does it, taking out the Aparoids but also General Pepper in the process. However, just as Pepper's ship is about to crash, Peppy, being the absolute legend that he is, flies in to break the General's fall, saving his life. Seeing Peppy act in such a heroic way is fitting for his character, and we get to see even more of that later on in this game. It's then that we see Wolf give Fox one piece of advice.
Don't hesitate. When the time comes, just act.
Over the course of this game, there's kind of a mutual respect that forms between Fox and Wolf, and considering how long they've been against each other, that's a great thing to see. Also, this all happens in one chapter. Anyways, the war with the Aparoids all leads up to one final battle. After destroying their homeworld, there's only one thing left for the team to do: take out the Aparoid Queen. The only issue is that there's a huge force field that's blocking their way and nothing seems to be able to break through it. But then, when all hope seems lost, in comes Peppy, the absolute legend, flying aboard the Great Fox, which looks to have also been infected. In a last-ditch effort, Peppy sacrifices himself by flying headfirst into the force field, all guns blazing, and once again, this puts Fox in a really tough spot. His longtime friend and father figure has quite possibly just died, and the team is in absolute disarray. But in spite of this, Fox leads the team forth, not wanting to let Peppy's sacrifice be in vain. It's then time for the final showdown, and the stakes are high, but luckily everyone lends a hand, even Starwolf. The battle feels so dramatic, and I love it. We get to see just how crazy a foe the Aparoids are, with the Queen using the data she's harvested from everyone that's been infected by the Aparoids to imitate them. She impersonates Pigma, Peppy, General Pepper, and even James McCloud. This makes the fight even more intense, as the team has to see through the Queen's illusions, no matter how convincing they may be. After a really cool boss battle, the Aparoid Queen is defeated and the team celebrates a bittersweet victory, as they may have won, but at what cost? Everyone's a little downcast until...
Hey, you're all okay.
Whew, that was hairy. I promise I'm really gonna retire after this.
The man, the myth, the legend, Peppy Hare survived through it all. Goofy voice acting aside, this moment, when combined with the orchestral remix of the main theme playing in the background, is actually really sweet, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't bring a solitary tear to my eye. This is the perfect bookend to an incredible story. It's really a shame to me that Star Fox Assault isn't often talked about these days. The game came out in 2005, which was a pretty awkward time when you consider that the GameCube was nearing the end of its life, with the Wii being just around the corner. When you combine that with the fact that it followed Star Fox Adventures, which turned a lot of people away from the franchise, it's no wonder that it received such a lukewarm reception. Of course, I have nothing against Adventures. In fact, I loved that game to death. Over 2 years ago now, I made a review on it detailing why I enjoyed it so much. The way I see it, 64, Adventures, and Assault make an odd but beautiful trilogy. I just wish they'd carried on the story from where Assault left off, rather than just continuing to reboot the franchise outright. I mean, technically they did with Star Fox Command if you can count that, but yeah, I don't think anyone does. Star Fox Assault was a little rough around the edges, the ground controls were finicky, the voice acting was questionable, and the main campaign was pretty short. But if you can look past that, what you're left with is a really fun game. One that built upon the foundations of previous entries in a way that just made sense. And that is what makes this game so special. That, my friends, is the untold potential of Star Fox Assault.